Hi, I'm Bill Furlong, and welcome to the Question of Character podcast. Today's topic is an example of how leadership character can radically transform outcomes. And it's in the context of technical expertise, and specifically Formula Race Car. This example, which has been the subject of a very intense academic study, can apply really to all of the technical professions, from engineering to tech to law to medicine to accounting. But first, let's introduce today's co-host and my colleague, Dr. Matt Crossan. And as you know, Mary is a distinguished university professor at Western and recently received the Academy of Management Distinguished Educator Award. And I'm actually going to put in the show notes a link to the short speech that Mary gave in accepting that award. Mary's very impressive bio can be found in links to this episode, the Question of Character website, or at the Ivy website as well. Mary, it's so nice to see you again, and congratulations on this wonderful award.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be here.
So now I'd like to welcome today's special guest. He has not been a guest on our show before, but just about everyone else in his family has. He has an undergraduate and graduate degrees in mechanical and materials engineering from Western University in London, Ontario. In his senior year, he led the Formula SAE team, which designs, builds, and races a new race car every year to compete against other universities and their engineering schools from all around the world. His master's degree was related to working with carbon fiber reinforced plastics in the automotive industry, and his thesis was on improving material characterization test methods. It follows then that upon graduation, he won an opportunity from amongst thousands of applicants to join the Renault F1 team, which is now the Alpine F1 team, as part of the Infinity Engineering Academy, which involves 6 months with the F1 team and 6 months at the Nissan UK headquarters. And while he was at Nissan, he focused on improving the ride and handling performance of road cars. Following this year, he spent another year at the Renault F1 team before moving to Mahindra Racing. His time at Renault F1 was split between performance optimization, simulation development, and race strategy. And while he's at Mahindra Racing, it's in the Formula E, or the electric car racing, and there he's involved in the vehicle performance group. So who is this automotive engineering genius? Well, it's none other than Matt Crossan. So welcome, Matt, and your bio is most impressive. And congratulations, by the way, on your recent marriage. Mary shared some photos and everyone looked so unbelievably happy. So welcome, Matt, to the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. A few thank yous there. Thank you for the congrats. Thank you for having me, and happy to be here.
So a bit of a preview of today's podcast. We're going to discuss leader character in the context of how it can transform individuals and organizations, their outcomes, and their well-being. And today we have a very specific case in an extremely technically challenging context of where leader character radically and measurably impacted a team's performance. This whole event was the subject of a peer-reviewed academic paper, which we'll put out in the show notes and which will come up in our discussion today. And we're extremely excited to share this story. We think it's highly persuasive and demonstrating the power of leadership character and why you and your organization should embrace it and get your own transformation started. So today we have two of the story's main protagonists, Matt Crossan and Mary Crossan. And I'm hoping we can start the conversation today just sharing with our audience the history of the event. Matt, your participation in it. Western had been involved in this, I think, for many years. Who are the teams that typically do well? And even why do students participate? I mean, there's an awful lot of work that you do in any event. You're extremely busy. So, do you volunteer for this? Is it a credit course? I mean, really, all of those elements to give our audience a sense of the event before we sort of lead into the experience that you and Mary and your teammates had.
Yeah, of course. So Western Formula Racing, which is what we call the team for the Formula SAE team at Western University, they, at the time that I was on the team, had been around for about 25 years, and the whole competition's been around for a lot longer than that. And the whole aim of the competition is it's meant to be completely volunteer based for only students at universities, and the idea being to give engineers a practical hands-on experience for what they're learning in the classroom, to take it and apply it to a real world type of situation and to interact with other universities, as well as professional companies that they would need the help of along the way in terms of learning and experience. So I joined in my second year of university after a few of my friends had gone through the program, had started in the program in their first year, and it just sounded like an awesome opportunity to really, you had all these resources that at that point all the upper years had been gathering resources, and were basically just allowed to design whatever we set our mind to and come up with whatever we thought would be would work well on the car, and we could just build it and race it. And so I think that's really what the reason why people volunteered for it is. You don't get tens of thousands of dollars in terms of sponsorship and things like that, and free product that easily anywhere else. And it's also just the program having been around for so long, it's been well established. It's quite a good way to, first of all, train up in experiences that you wouldn't get elsewhere. So in mechanical and materials engineering, we don't specifically focus on a ton of automotive or even motorsport experience. So I think people really, they want to volunteer because it's a way to really get their hands dirty that they couldn't any other way.
And you start every year building this car from scratch. I mean, from the engine all the way out, or is it more a case of you're sort of, you take an existing engine and you tweak it, and you're sort of, the body starts from scratch, or how much of a rebuild is it from year to year?
Yeah, so every single part on the car is meant to be completely new. You're not supposed to reuse any part of the car, and they do go through some checks to make sure that you're not just reusing the same parts over and over again. That's not to say you can't purchase parts. So for us, for example, we purchased an engine, and for the next year you purchase the same engine. So you can redo that, you just can't use the same one. But then often just buying something completely off the shelf isn't going to be good enough in motorsports. Right. So we would do our own things like tuning the engine, or modifications like to the cylinders, to the intakes and the exhaust manifolds. So there was very few parts on the car that were actually purchased and not tweaked year on year.
And roughly how big is the team? How many people on the team?
So I mean, when it started out, it would have just been about 5 people or so, and it's grown to some years being roughly 30 people to could be up to 50, 60 people at a time. It definitely fluctuates throughout the year. So at the start of every school year, we'll have an intake of what we call new recruits, and that could be 50 people that are interested, and we'll go through a training process, which starts to weed out people that are interested but not really having the time commitment, and the people that are actually wanting to learn and actually contribute. So it can be roughly 50 people, but oftentimes you're getting a core group closer to 10 people, mostly the seniors, who are the ones that are spending every single night in the shop working on the car.
Wow. And so then you build this car, and then you start to race it, and there's I guess a series of tests that you go through, and then there's very technical results that come out the other end. It's not an aesthetic thing, it's a performance oriented measurement. Is that fair?
Yeah, so we're actually judged on quite a wide range, including aesthetics, which was actually part of the reason for, I think, some of the success that we had in my senior year, was that there were some comments about the aesthetics of the cars in previous years. So the whole, I guess the overarching goal of the competition is that we're trying to design a car, and we have to build a business case around it to sell it to a potential fictional market. So we do get judged on a business case that we have to come up with. We get judged on the design, so we need to talk to judges from industry and justify why we've decided to do what we do. So for example, with the engine, why would we choose this specific 4-cylinder 600cc engine over maybe a single cylinder engine that would be lighter but less power? So we have to justify why we think the trade-offs work. And then we have a cost event as well. So you can build an amazing car, but if it's super expensive, then you're not going to do as well. And then finally, we have the fun parts, which is the dynamic events, which is different types of racing. So like a drag strip, an autocross event, an endurance event, and so on. And so, yeah, aesthetics does come into play into the some of the design and the business case and things like that. So, yeah.
And then you'll go into the competition, you'll build your car, and then you go into competition. And my recollection or understanding is that there's Canadian competition or North American competition, and then other regional competitions that are going on at the same time, and eventually the winners of those culminating, I understand, in Germany. Is that right?
Yeah, sort of. So there's competitions that take place all over the world, and there's really not like a circuit. It's not like an F1 where you have, let's say, 20 races and you have to go to all 20 races. The events are put on and they're meant to be a bit more regional. But eventually some of the certain events end up gaining more popularity than others because all of the best teams happen to be in that area, or that event becomes more popular. So in North America, when I was in the competition, the biggest event was in Michigan at the Michigan International Speedway. But there was also 2 other North American events. There was what we call Formula North, which was in Barrie in Canada, and then there was a race in Lincoln, Nebraska as well. But so often you just had North American teams competing in those competitions, but we also had some teams coming over from Europe. So for example, some of the German teams, a lot of good car manufacturers coming out of there. So they have a very strong support and showing. Also British universities, things like that would come over and often would dominate in some of the North American competitions. So yeah, they were all at the competition in Formula Student Germany, which is, I think most people would look at as being the most prestigious one because all the best teams just happen to be there.
And maybe just to give people a sense of then the results that had occurred, because I think part of the reason for the study is that because you've been involved in it for several years in a row, and Western had been engaged in, as you mentioned, for a number of decades, but the results you achieved were significantly improved relative to other years. And can you just give our audience a sense of the results that historically Western had, and then the school, and then how that changed in the year that you were there?
Each of the competitions that you participate in can go towards a world ranking. It's a bit of an unofficial one, but everyone follows it, so it's as official as it gets. And there's over 500 universities from around the world that participate in these competitions around the world. So the more competitions you do, the better that you do in them contribute to your world ranking score. And at the time, in my senior year, when we started, so building on the previous years, and it takes into account a few of your previous competitions, so it could be a couple years worth of scores. We were in 54th, and we ended up improving to 13th out of over 500 universities, all within the 1 year, and that was with a first place, 2 second place, and then 2 other top 10 finishes, which was the best at that point in our 30-year history. So yeah, really proud of the accomplishments that we had as a team.
That is absolutely remarkable in such a competitive, technically driven competition on a global scale. To have improved your rankings by that much in the space of 12 months is nothing short of absolutely transformational. And you must have worked, I know that you and your team worked extremely hard to get those kinds of results. But I think as we talk about today, it was not just the effort of working hard, but it's also how I think incorporating leadership character into the way the team and the individuals within the team worked was, I think, a big ingredient for the success that you had. So, but again, congratulations on that wonderful success. You must be very proud, and I'm sure you are.
Thank you so much. Yes, very proud.
Mary, was there anything and so that's, again, I'm trying to give the audience a sense of the history of the competition. Mary or Matt, is there anything that we're missing so that people get a sense of the competition and what went into it?
I think we'll kind of move into this maybe a little bit more, but I think you get to understand the competition a bit more when you understand part of the story. And the beginning of this was, and the reason we decided to write an article about it is because it was an extraordinary story, and we wanted to help other organizations understand what does it look like to elevate character alongside competence, and how can you do it. So it started off just with a workshop, Matt, and there was a kind of a triumvirate who were running the team, had asked if we could run a leader character workshop, which we did. We spent the day on that workshop focusing on what are the dimensions of character. Of course, all of our prior podcasts would talk about a lot of these ideas about character. And we also did a particular focus on the dimension of transcendence. Write a story yet to be written for which you'd be incredibly proud. That they wrote individually, and then as groups, and then as the team. And what we found as we unpacked some of this going forward is that it seemed to really activate on character in people. So I think anybody listening to any of this on a competence side, legal, engineering, medical competence, it's so knowledge-based about what it is that you do. And when you start to activate on things like transcendence and drive and courage in a way that you hadn't, it somehow gets you into another gear. Matt, that's kind of how I would describe what happened. And the article describes people's reactions to that. Like, many people were just so pumped by the end of the workshop. Would you agree with how that day played out?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was definitely a pivotal moment with the team, getting everyone fired up for the season. So it was a great way to kick off the season.
And it's when we talk about the story, Bill, we'd like to try to maybe draw some parallels to organization life, so not just the student experience around something like this. And one of the things that you pick up in the storyline is, so you come out of a workshop, how do you go beyond one-day experience to embedding character in the day-to-day, dealing with it in crisis? So the competitions, which we didn't talk about, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And so part of the storyline, like life, is that, so how does character show up alongside competence in that? So we'll unpack that a little bit. I thought it might be helpful, though. I wanted to share this quote that I've shared with many organizations, because I thought, oh boy, this captures life in organizations. And this is somebody reflecting on what happened in prior years. And somebody said in the team, if you didn't have their work done on time, to handle that in prior years would be people getting frustrated and upset. It wasn't like there was any true consequence other than letting down the team. And because we're all volunteers, you can easily just walk away from that. Sometimes it was frustrating when you didn't have enough time to finish your work, and then you'd have these leaders saying, why isn't it done yet? And then you'd have the people saying, well, I couldn't handle it with school, with work, or with formula in school. Trying to manage my own schedule was very difficult. And then here's how they finished. You'd have arguments, and then sometimes people would not act very professional. And I was thinking about that, and in my mind, it's not just a volunteer organization. It's every organization. And I'm curious, Matt, when you think about your experience, the parallel from that FSA 18 to organizations you've been working in or have been in, how much would you say was this indicative of how a lot of organizations operate?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the part that you spoke about with if someone wasn't getting the work done that they needed to, and a leader was, down their neck and saying we have deadlines that we need to meet. I mean, that happens to everyone in every industry, doesn't it? And really learning, I think actually on both sides, both on the leader side, but also let's say on the person that's not getting the work done side. There's lessons to be learned on both sides, and in terms of, I mean, in this volunteer organizations, how do you motivate someone who's completely volunteer based is something that's really challenging. And one of the things that one of the quotes actually that stuck with me throughout the year a lot was, you don't, I'm paraphrasing quite a bit, but you don't just tell people to build a boat, you teach them to yearn for the open sea. And that was one that like I really first came to terms with in that final year, but when I was trying to go through as a leader in that season, that I took to heart is people will be inspired by a common goal and a common objective that they're trying to achieve, and something that they believe in and something that they feel they're a part of trying to achieve, versus if you're just sitting there and saying, hey, we've got this deadline tomorrow, you kind of want the people to want to hit the deadline. You don't want them to have to hit it just because they're telling you to. So there's quite a few lessons that I know I learned throughout that year.
So then, Matt, thinking about, the prevalence in many workplaces, in particular where it's very demanding, and there's a lot of pressure to produce, and that sometimes, when things don't get done in the time or the way that people want them to do, a positive workplace and attitude kind of starts to turn into a negative one or a bad attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was maybe your thinking around that, Mary or Matt, as to how character was able to sort of, address that or change that normal dynamic?
Yeah, I think Bill, it's a really good question, because we use the toolkit of attitude, motivation, personality. It's like, oh, they got a bad attitude or they're not motivated. But we haven't actually understood the toolkit of character as a fundamental means by which you could actually transform somebody's level of accountability or their courage or their drive or their transcendence. And often people don't even have a means to diagnose what's going on. Like, how can I think about those kinds of issues? So one of the things that we'll talk about were that people could just start to diagnose what's happening with themselves and with somebody else about it. And I don't know about how you think about this, Matt, but I think it's kind of crippling in organizations when you don't have a language of character or a toolkit of character to deal with issues of attitude and motivation. It's difficult.
Yeah, and I think one of the more common ones that I see, being in such a competitive industry, is humanity really being one area where I think teams can turn it into a strength, the competitiveness. So, for example, in F1 and Formula E, you can have some teams that are known to be very cutthroat with their team members, where if someone makes a mistake, that's it, they're gone, they're out. And there can be a lot of finger blaming, and it's really a top down of you're always reporting to someone above you, and you're always so focused on just not messing up or making sure that you achieve the objective that your manager or your manager's manager is setting out, rather than on the flip side you have teams that are more looking to build up their team and the people in their team, and they're wanting to actually take those mistakes as something that's going to make their team stronger. So if somebody that's on your team has made a mistake, instead of finger pointing and saying, oh, you made the mistake, you're out, you're gone, kind of thing, and everyone else, let this be a lesson to you, you say, what was it that led to this mistake? Like, what was it as an organization that allowed this type of mistake to happen, and what can we do to make sure to prevent it from happening in the future? So when you take a bit more of the human approach, where you're interested in developing the people in your team, you now have people that aren't afraid to take risks, people that aren't afraid to do the work that they think is going to be beneficial rather than just what they think is going to please their manager. And then you also have people that are going to stay in a team longer And with longevity, you get experience. And I'd much rather have the person that's already made the mistake than the person that's coming fresh, who's never made the mistake before and doesn't have the experience. So, and that's just one example with humanity. There's so many different ones.
And Matt, I loved when you guys did that workshop. You naturally went to an aspiration about the car, this car being, something that was going to be incredibly innovative. But you equally said you wanted to be pioneers in how the team operated. And I think your discussion about, the humanity, the transcendence, the courage, the accountability, to me really spoke to very much the efforts that you guys were putting in every single day to being different people and a different team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, after the workshop, one of the first things that we did is, it comes down a little bit to the aesthetics again, is when we were looking at what we wanted out of a team, not just a world-class team, but to also have a world-class environment. So one thing that one of the more famous judges in Formula SAE would keep saying is, if you want to build an A team or a world-class, if you wanted to build an A car, a world-class car, first you had to build a world-class team. And that's something we really took to heart. And when we thought about what does a world-class team look like, one of the things that came to mind was that they've got a world-class shop or factory or office to work in. And at the time we were thinking of the F1 teams, where they've got these nice, clean, white, perfectly pristine rooms that you could see a speck of dust, you could hear a pin drop. You look at these places and they're beautiful, and it actually is encouraging you to make beautiful things, and not just for the sake of making it look good, but actually when you're trying to make something that's world class and you're seeing it in the backdrop of a world class backdrop, you actually feel like you need to do a better job, because it has to be better to live in this type of space, and you spot all the different mistakes. So yeah, one of the first things we did after the workshop was actually what we call shoptimization, where we did a complete overhaul of our workshop, completely ripped up and stripped the floors, everything ripped out and rebuilt, and not just bought but built with our own hands. So it was something that we really felt like we contributed to making this environment that was conducive to building this world-class race car.
Matt, when you talk about this embedding character into your context, like making sure that the context reflects the character that you were bringing to it, it reminded me of a conversation we had where we're thinking many organizations lose sight of some of this. Like, they don't recognize this sort of symbolic nature about how what's happening in the organization may reflect the nature of the character that they want. And so people get really short-sighted about things. Like, if they don't see a one-to-one correspondence, they get really narrow about it. Whereas, the transcendence that you guys brought to it was recognizing, if we're in this environment every day, it's gonna affect how we think and what we do. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair statement about organizations, how short-sighted they can become?
Yeah, and I was just going to also comment, when you talk about the environment, it's not just about the physical environment, it's also about the type of environment that the people are creating. So creating an environment that's accepting, that people are wanting to come to, where they feel like they can talk to you and things like that. So it was not just about developing this physical environment, but also from a people perspective. But yeah, when you mentioned being short-sighted, actually probably going back a few more years before my senior year, there was quite a bit of learning that the team had gone through at that point as well. So we had, in 2010, I think it was, one of the best years at that time, one of the best years that the team had gone through. And then in 2011, it was one of the worst years that the team had. And so in 2012, the team really took a hard look at how could we go from doing so well and being so successful, and the next year, all they really wanted to do was almost build the exact same car. It had to be new parts, but just do it again. Don't tweak too much. Let's just do it again. It worked out well last year, and it was one of the worst years. And so there's a big introspective look that the team did, and out of it we came, well, not me, but the people before me came up with what we called the 3 E's for the team, which were three ideas to live by with every decision, which was called excellence, endurance, and enthusiasm, where excellence was to develop highly skilled and effective professionals. I can still remember this now 8 years later. Endurance was ensuring the long-term success of the team, and enthusiasm was to have fun. And those were the three pillars that we really lived by. Even in 2015, when we were going through all this leader character work, we were still trying to live by those things. And you notice endurance. So talking about being short-sighted, every decision that we made from 2012 onwards, then we tried to bake this into our lives more and more every year. Every decision was meant to be, had to reflect, how is this going to benefit the long-term success of the team, which is quite difficult when you have such a fast turnover that anyone is only ever in the team for a maximum of 4 years. So these things like the shoptimization, where you're building this shop, and it's not just going to be for the benefit of the year in my senior year, but for years and years to come. So yeah, there's a lot that I think we focused on in terms of long-term success.
I mean, there's 2 thoughts that occur to me right away as well before we move on to the next part. One is that oftentimes organizations, people think things like humanity and humility and justice come at the expense of performance. And I think what we talk about here is actually it enhances performance and creates this long-term sustainable environment. And the second thing is that when people talk about workplaces, oftentimes they're thinking we're going to have to spend a ton of money here to get this right. We're going to have to buy the best furniture, the best AV equipment. But really what it boiled down to is picking the stuff that was functional, that worked. But that what it really truly reflected, though, was how much care that you had with respect to the work that you were doing and how important it was to you. And that's not something which I think is measured in terms of dollars and cents. As a matter of fact, I think when you spend dollars and cents, it can actually take your eye off that ball. Mm-hmm. So maybe a little bit of talk, Matt, about, so you had this opportunity to incorporate leader character in such a comprehensive and immersive way over the course of that experience. What would you say that you began to learn about, understanding your own character, how it gets activated, how you can develop it, and maybe, activate it, and how you saw that in yourself, and perhaps how you saw that in others on the team? Any experiences or observations you could share?
First of all, with that very first workshop, I think the most, let's say, the thing that struck me the most was actually the talk about transcendence and imagining what we wanted to be, how we wanted people to talk about us at the end of the year. And I really felt like that was the glue that held us together throughout the year, was that we had this common goal and vision of what we wanted this team to look like at the end of the year, not just in terms of success on the track, but also like the environment that we wanted to create, the legacy that we were going to leave, the impact on our community. There are so many different things in these aspirations, and it really felt like that was the glue that held us together, and really ended up being a driving force throughout the season as well.
If I think about that, Matt, I see a lot of organizations that have that kind of workshop, and then it doesn't sustain because people get all fired up about it. And I think what was really interesting about your team was to watch the day in and day out investment in that. And I think a lot of times, transcendence really gets tested under difficult circumstances, and thinking about particularly organizations having scarce resources, time and resources, right, to deal with things. If I use the example, one of the key initiatives that you were facing was thinking that it was a good idea to take the team to go to Germany And I remember at the time, nobody thought it was a good idea. You know, there was it didn't have the time, didn't have the resources, didn't, lots of things. The team had never been, a lot of people talking about they didn't belong even in Germany, hadn't had a good enough performance in North America to make the trip. And if I think about the example about activating on the muscle of transcendence, it's having, being that, you know, finding the creative solutions, right? Thinking about being purposive, optimistic, creative, like exercising those muscles. And an example for you would be every time obstacles were being raised, it was, well, how are we going to solve them? As an example, how many teams did you write in Germany to host you guys? Because people were going, well, we're going to send the car over in a crate and we got to put it back together and we have no shop. How many teams? I can't remember how many you wrote
like
to host you.
Yeah, something like 84 teams just in Germany.
And the team that hosted you ended up inviting you. I mean, you guys used their workshop. They, like, maybe talk a little bit about how important was, you know, get back to collaboration. Like, you've got transcendence, but you can't do it on your own. Think about how that team supported you guys.
Mm-hmm. So we eventually connected. There was very few teams that ended up coming back to us, and some of them were already supporting some other teams that were coming over. But eventually we ended up with being hosted by a team from Regensburg in Germany, and they were so welcoming. They were there to receive the crate. They welcomed us with open arms to our shop. They even had their own transportation to get to the event, which they let us share, their truck, their whole kitchen, their living facilities, everything like that. They really opened up their arms, their testing facilities that they had there as well, so that when we put the car back together, we actually had a place to test it before we took it to the competition for the first time. So, I mean, there's so many steps along the road where we say we could have faltered, or we could have been tripped up, and it really is miraculous that we made it all the way in the end. And it's very satisfying to look back and see that there was a positive outcome, because there could have been this whole momentum and this whole drive, and any little thing could have tripped us up, and, you know, we could have been looking back at it quite differently. And yeah, it was something that really snowballed. So as Mary was saying, that initially it was kind of just one of those ideas in the back burner, but, you know, we got to focus on our main competitions. And I really had it in my mind that I was gonna get the crate sent there and show up on my own pretty much. Obviously that wouldn't have been possible. I wouldn't have been able to do that. But I think once people saw the passion that I had, it's infectious, and people wanted to join in. And the one that really, I think, caught on to people is about 10 months before the competition, you need to sign up for the competition, and just getting into the competition is a competition in itself. And they do a quiz where it gets distributed to all the teams. And I think the competition was, or the quiz that gets sent out was something like 11 a.m. German time, which would have been 5 a.m. in Canada. And so 5 a.m. this one morning, there was two levels to the quiz. There's an early opportunity for North American teams. So 5 a.m. I showed up with the two other team leads, I think it was, and we tried to do the quiz, and we weren't fast enough, and we didn't get into the competition. So we'd hit kind of our first stumbling block there. And when we talked to the team and said, hey, like, these other teams, they've got like 20, 30 people all doing this quiz at the same time. Like, we really need some support. It's going to cost, I think it was something like €1,000 to put in our registration fee that would have been non-refundable. But it was sort of like, hey, let's take a bet on it. We don't actually have to follow through with it, but let's put €1,000 euros probably it was, and let's even just go through the process. So when we actually want to do it in a future year, we know what it's like. So it wasn't, at this point, it still wasn't defined that we wanted to go. And so I think it was a week later, we ended up having 30 people all show up at 5 a.m. to do this quiz. And we ended up getting in. And I really think that was a pivotal moment where we now had people that had put in their own, maybe not blood, sweat, and tears at that point, but they had felt like they had put in their own contribution. And they could see that actually this is a realistic goal. We'd gotten in to the competition. Hey, we've got some skin in the game now. And I think that's really the point where it took off.
And that, I think, this story, Bill, here for organizations and individuals is, we've often talked about micro moments. And I think to juxtapose that against a big, hairy, audacious goal, which is kind of out there, it takes these micro moments all the time where you're constantly working kind of the problem, but it's not just in an analytical sense, but it's in that kind of aspirational activating on your transcendence to say, I'm not giving up here, or your courage, right, or your drive, or collaboration, like working with the Regensburg team. And that, I think, is this kind of daily evidence of where character appears. It also appears a lot in crisis. So when, Matt, you talked about a lot of things could have gone wrong. Well, a lot of things did go wrong.
That's true.
I remember watching a competition in Barrie, and the team was looking across the tarmac, and the car stopped dead in the midst of this competition. And I think somebody was trying to look through binoculars as to what was going on in the field, and I think somebody said, it looks like the control arm is broken or something. And you guys were just in the midst of going to a design review, like right after this competition, so there was no time to really understand what had gone wrong with the car, because the car was going to be in place and the judges were going to be looking at it. And then I watched you guys from, it was kind of in a bit of an auditorium area where the design review was happening. And as soon as the design review finished, and you can tell me what was happening in the huddle, but you guys huddled so fast, and it was like it felt like half an hour max. There was a whole plan for how you were going to get this control arm, if I've got the right part right, manufactured, like go back. So tell us a little bit about what had to happen for that to occur, because the next day, I remember the organizers saying, every team said they would have pulled out had that happened to them. So I think it's really interesting to say, what was it about your team that handled that crisis moment differently than another team might have?
I think that last part's really the key part of it, but I'll start off with a little bit more. So yeah, exactly right. One of the control arms broke off, which the control arms are the suspension for a race car. So quite literally, one of our wheels fell off. So that was quite dramatic. So in the autocross event, which is one of the big events, you get a few different chances to set a single lap time. And on one of our attempts, the wheel fell off. So that was it. We'd set a time already, so it was enough to keep us in the running. But the next day we had an endurance event, which is now not just one lap, but many laps that you had to do in a row. So clearly, if the suspension couldn't stick together for a single lap at a time, it wasn't going to stick together. Even if we just rebuilt the same thing, which would have been an achievement in its own, it wouldn't have held together for a full race. So yeah, first of all, we had to go to this design event, which a little embarrassing, trying to justify why we built such a great car with the wheel hanging off. But we got through it. I tried to focus on, let's say, some of the good parts, and also proving to the judges that actually at that point that we already knew some of the reasons why it might have failed and things like that. So we finished the competition, and then one of my other co-leads at that point took over, and there was never a question of that's it, let's pack up and go home. It was, what's the game plan, how do we get this fixed? Not just, as I said, replace the part with a new part, because they're all completely bespoke, and it's taken us a year to build this car. It's not like you just go back to the factory and pick another part off the rack and bolt it back on. It's completely from scratch. So put together a plan of people that had to go back to London, drive all the way back to London. There was people that were designated drivers because you needed people to be working through the night, some people to be driving, then people staying back in Barrie at the competition because there was other parts of the car that were damaged, like the brakes needed to be rebled, with the hydraulics, things needed to be repaired, and then all the normal preparation that we would have been doing for the endurance event. Setting up the car, making sure everything's reliability checked, going through all of our post event and pre-event checks and things like that. So yeah, it was a monumental effort to really pull together. And then yes, we came back the next day. I don't think a lot of people expected us to be back so soon. And if I remember, so we ended up finishing second overall in the competition, but we actually won that endurance event. So yeah, it was quite an accomplishment to bounce back from that.
And Matt, as you and your team are making these decisions and overcoming these obstacles, are you talking about or thinking about character and the various dimensions? Oh, this is where I'm employing my drive or my temperance. Or at that point, had it just become really a habit that you were just, that the contagion and the culture had become such that you were, once you were sort of given the framework of what strength of character looked like, that had just become part of how you just behaved in the micro moments, almost as a habitual way? Or was there some cases of sometimes you'd have to stand back and say, okay, this is where I need to really sort of bump up my transcendence, or I really need to double down on my temperance?
Yeah, I think it was completely habitual at that point. There's no question. And as you said, it's really building up on all the moments beforehand that had gotten us to that point where we actually had this strength of character that we could lean on, and actually just end up focusing more on the technical and the operational, what needs to get done, rather than a question of, oh, should we do this? Oh, do we need to work together? And there's no finger blaming or finger pointing blaming on whose part it was and whose fault, and sidelining them because it's like, no, you designed a bad one, we're going to take over and we're going to do this. It was none of that. It was, this is the person that designed it, they know it the most, let's get their expertise, why they think it might have failed. Is there anything that they can think of in the manufacturing process that could have led to it? And you get them involved in the process, and then they don't feel like it's their fault, and they're the expert on it, so they're probably the one that's going to fix it in the end. So you want them on your team. But there'd been all these moments throughout the season leading up, and even previous seasons, where you encounter these issues, and the way that you might have encountered an issue, maybe it wasn't as severe previously, is going to set you on the path for how you're going to deal with these future issues. And so we had this issue in the competition in Barrie, Formula North, and then we had all kinds of other issues throughout the year, but the next biggest issue that we faced was actually once we were in Germany, where again we'd gotten through a couple events of the competition, and then our engine blew up. So now we're a little bit further away from home. We're in Germany, so we can't just drive back to good old London, Ontario, and get our engine off the shelf and rebuild it. And an engine's a little bit more complicated to rebuild than a suspension arm. But same thing, we'd been in this situation before, and we knew we came back, and the next day we won the endurance event and we finished second in the competition. So again, there was no question of will we, won't we, whose fault it is, all these kind of things. What it did, it took this weight off of us and just let us focus directly on the technical challenges that we had at hand, and it wasn't even a question. And again, through the night, rebuilt an engine and come back, and eventually finishing 6th overall in the competition. So yeah, I said it's lucky that we ended up making it through, but maybe it's not luck when you've got those types of things that you're continually building on and persevering through.
And if I say, Bill, when you ask this question, I think it's really interesting. Character is habit. Really treating it that way so that you can rely on it under pressure. Fast forward to what was a pretty pivotal moment of your life with the competition with Infinity Renault, where you went to Montreal. You were down to 10 people from Canada who were going to be competing for the one spot out of Canada. And I remember you looking at the agenda, and one of the things was a character challenge. And you said to me, what do you think they're going to do? And I said, well, Matt, they probably don't really know what they're going to do. They just know that character is important. But what I said to you was, the one thing you don't have to worry about is you're around your character. You've been working on this, developing this. Just be confident in who you are. And the harder thing to do under a crucible moment, like in crisis, or in your case, when you really want to do well, it was like the amazing race of engineers over 2 days, that competition. I said, the hardest thing is just going to be yourself, and not second guess and try to be somebody else, or try to impress somebody, or try to this or try to that. And I think with character as habit, when it's cultivated to that level, that you can actually count on it in crisis, individually and collectively. The collective part for you guys was people not pointing fingers or laying blame or saying, well, we can't get it done, and having pessimism about what needed to be done. But it was really bringing incredible character, competence, and commitment at every moment, at every turn, which was incredible for me and to watch, which is why we wanted to capture this story in the article.
So Matt, I've heard it said that history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. So I think with respect to the broken rod or the broken shock, that I think you might have had something similar in your professional career. And just interesting, how could you contrast how the different teams reacted to the same event?
Yeah, so this year in Formula E, Mahindra Racing actually had to pull out of a race, which is relatively unheard of in a World Championship motorsport series. And the reason for that was that was safety issues that we had. We found one of our suspension members we didn't think was safe enough to race, and we had to we traveled all the way to Cape Town. Flew all the cars, all the team members, everything, all the way out there, and we'd done a couple practice sessions. And before going into qualifying and inspecting some of the suspension members, we realized this isn't safe enough to race. We can't put our drivers in this situation, and actually we need to pull out of this race. And I think that was, again, such an important moment in the team's history, because the performance so far in the season wasn't necessarily the strongest, and we really needed a good result. And it could have been that the team decided, let's go out and let's see what happens and let's risk it because we need the points here. But the team really stuck by what was important and the values that it wanted to instill, and it taking this safety first approach. I mean, it could have been the type of thing that ended a team, the publicity of pulling out of a race and all that kind of things. But we pulled out. We told the regulating body we don't think it's safe to race. Now the challenge is we've got another race. I think it was 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and I think the race after. So first of all, it's the exact same situation. It's not about finger blaming. It's what's the problem. How do we solve it? How do we prove that it's safe enough? How do we convince the drivers that it's safe enough? And all these kinds of things. And I was really pleased to experience all of the same things that I had felt in the Formula SAE team in terms of that character and how it, this problem, this issue, how it was faced, and how the team really rebounded around it. And it's something that's now strengthened the team, that it's something we all had to come together. So yeah, it's really interesting that going through university, you think, oh, this is just something a student's building a car will face issues like this, but then in my professional life, exact same types of issues come around. So yeah, definitely taking all these learnings forward.
A real sense of deja vu, and how interesting how character works into the decision of creating what's fundamentally a long-term decision that's in the best interests of the team and all of its stakeholders, not just the drivers, but the entire brand, I think, right? Is considered in a decision like that. I mean, that then sort of, I mean, so you're coming from this environment at Western where you've been used to in a highly collaborative team, and now you're heading out into the working world where you don't know what you're going to find, right? And as someone who's got such strength of character and such experience in knowing what a difference that makes in terms of not only the outcomes but also the sense of purpose and well-being that you have, how have you found in the working world collaboration? And you actually just gave a good example there with Mahindra, how it sounds like a very collaborative team. But any sense of how you've seen that functioning and operating in the working world from a collaborative perspective, and how you would compare that to what you'd experienced when you were at Western?
Yeah, so I think, at least with motorsports, what is a little bit maybe unique about it is it's still a bit of a team environment. Like, it feels like you're on a sports team. If anyone's been on a hockey team or something like that, the camaraderie that you feel when you're as part of a team is something that I really enjoy working in motorsports. Is it feels like a sports team, and you feel like these are your teammates, not just your coworkers, and it's that type of collaboration that if I leave motorsports, or when in my time when I was at Nissan, which is more on the automotive side, it's something that I really wanted to carry forward, is actually almost more like that teammate feeling rather than just a coworker type feeling. Within motorsports, though, we have to work with quite a few different suppliers. So we have our core team at Mahindra, but we also have, for example, our powertrain supplier who operates out of Germany. And of course, you've got the distance to contend with, you've got different cultures, not that much of a different time zone, but different working hours and things like that. And honestly, everyone's so smart, everyone's intelligent, everyone can do the job, everyone knows what it is that we want to do. And often the types of problems that we're facing on a regular basis are, how do we work more efficiently as a team? How do we collaborate better? And that's not just the tools and the process and operational, but people. How do we integrate better with each other? So it's placing someone from our team in their office, having someone from their office placed in our office, so that you have that humanity and you're not just butting heads. You've got a face and a person behind it. And I think that has really helped us when you're arguing over a point, it's a real person there that you're talking to, and they're trying to do their best, and they want what's best for the team as well. So I've found bringing that humanity into it has been really beneficial when you get to actually know your coworkers on a bit of a deeper level, and what motivates them as well. I've found to be hugely beneficial. But yeah, the collaboration is one of our biggest challenges, that's for sure.
I mean, Mary, it's something you've talked about in the past around the difference between teamwork and collaboration at its highest levels. And I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about how that's different.
Yeah, I mean, the collaboration, I think this is this piece that Matt was talking about. When you play on a team and you feel that interconnectedness, with somebody else, that you're not just there coordinating, but you share that common purpose. I think, Matt, it kind of can get down to transcendence as well about that. There was something else in your story that I thought, though, was interesting, that enables, I think, that collaboration, which is a lot of humility. So one of the things when you're dealing with very smart and capable people is you can feel pretty stupid, right, by asking a question that you're just not certain about, or questioning somebody who's really smart and capable. And I think one of the things that we find around areas where there's high competence, engineering, medicine, law, you can really get a lot of arrogance stepping in, and you actually compromise collaboration because people fear speaking up. You know, they fear looking stupid. They fear being able to raise an issue that they don't have the answer to. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
I think you're exactly right there in terms of, trying to stick your neck out, and being willing to make mistakes. And I mean, I've talked about it a couple of times, but being in an environment where you feel like you can make mistakes will foster people to be willing to ask what they think is a stupid question, and be willing to set their ego aside, because it's not, you're not playing a game of who's best and who's brightest and who's smartest. You're just trying to put almost every and any idea forward, and even if it may not be the best idea, you're putting it forward not just because you think it's a good idea. You're putting it forward because actually it could spark some idea in someone else. So actually to put something forward without even thinking, no, this is the right thing, but just putting it forward because it'll allow collaboration with other people who maybe they've got the better experience. And one thing that I find actually is when you have new members coming into a team, or you have new employees coming into your work, can often actually be the time where you end up developing some of the best ideas, because they're coming in and they're asking these questions simply because they don't know. And they're saying, why do we do this like this? Why is this done this way? And they're asking these questions that are really, let's say, from a place of just being naive. And it's great because they're in that position. You're not expecting a lot from them. Of course they don't know. They're new, and they're asking those questions. But when you actually have to then dig in and be like, oh, actually, why do we do it that way? That's when you really reflect and actually can get some of your best new ideas, or even just solidify the beliefs that you already hold. So it doesn't just need to be someone that's new to the team that can be asking those what we call stupid questions, or those obvious questions. It can be anyone really in the team. You could be asking it to someone that's outside your department. You could be asking it of your manager. You could be the expert in your field and still be asking those types of questions. But it's things that that really make you think and really reflect.
I love that question and that answer, Matt, because that really creates the connection between how strength and humility is so important to strengthen in collaboration. Because if you're afraid, if you're guarding your reputation, or everyone thinks I'm smart, so I better not come up differently by asking that kind of a question, and then collaboration starts to just it begins to close down. And clearly, at the levels at which you're competing, every edge that you can get, you have to try and achieve. And that the technical aspects start to soon become basically those technical differences at the highest ends is less around the technical competencies of people, but more around their capacity to actually ask those kinds of questions and collaborate in that kind of way, which I think for many people would be counterintuitive. I think many people would just think there's a whole bunch of gearheads sitting down going through formulas. That's how they win. And I think what your insight creates is it's these are really clever people, but that's not what that winning edge represents.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many times where someone's asked that question, and you could just respond and say, oh, it's just the way that it's done. But you could respond and say, actually, I don't really know. That's a great question. And you revisit some of these core beliefs that you have. So it could be in terms of the way that we've designed the car, and it's just been this long held core belief, and nobody actually really knows why we've decided to do things that way. And it takes someone to come in and ask this question and say, well, why do we do it that way? That you actually revisit, and it can be something that's so fundamental to the performance of the team that we've just all accepted because nobody's thought to ask the question.
This has been a very interesting and exciting and memorable episode. It's an absolutely remarkable story. It almost has a certain sort of almost of like a David and Goliath theme to it, where this university from London, Ontario goes and goes toe to toe with the best engineering schools, auto engineering schools in the world, and matches them. It's just remarkable, Matt, the work that you and your team had put in, and the way how leader character radically transformed the people and the outcomes of your organization in an extremely technical and demanding field. So thank you again, Matt. It's been truly a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation today and your insights.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So if you've liked what you've heard today, please share it with your friends and your colleagues. And if you really like what you've heard and seen today, then please feel free to subscribe to us on our podcast, Question of Character. We also have a website, questionofcharacter.com, where we will be posting various resources and articles. And in particular, any links to any schematics or diagrams, maybe a couple of photos and other items that have been referred to in today's podcast. It's also a place where you can send us your comments, your thoughts on what you have heard, and maybe any suggestions you might have for future podcasts. We will also post links to the Ian O. Anatowicz Institute for Leadership at the Ivey Business School, where there are even more resources, articles, and information about leader character. So it's time to wrap up. Matt?
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Matt. And Mary actually is having some connection issues, so I'll say goodbye on Mary's behalf. And from me, it's also thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.